Welcome to Season 3 of the FYI on Youth Ministry, the podcast where the FYI team explores fresh ideas, diverse stories, and of course, groundbreaking research. This season, we're talking about identity, belonging, and purpose. Our hosts are Jennifer Guerra Aldana and Giovanny Panginda. And our guests today are Dr. Carol Powell and Brad Griffin.
Do you want to talk about how much you wanted a particular shirt? I think this is fascinating.
Yeah, very good. I was going to say, I can't believe you're going to make me tell this one. And then I thought, oh, well, I did actually write about it. So it's on my head already.
They're here to talk about FYI's latest book, 3 Big Questions That Change Every Teenager. But first, let's hear from some teenagers. Okay, so when you think about yourself, can you think of words that describe who you are? Can you give me like 1 or 2 words?
For me, one of the big ones is responsibility, because that's how I was raised.
I would describe myself as creative.
I'm soft-spoken, but when you really get to know me, I'm cheerful.
I would describe myself quite, I don't know. It's a little bit weird being a teen. I call it the no man's land of age. When you're a child, I guess, I don't want to say have more freedom, but I guess you do. And when you turn a teen, you have to start thinking about your adult life quite a bit, and it's not as carefree anymore. You also become, more self-conscious and nervous about, your appearance and a lot of other things.
Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer Guerra Aldana, and I am really excited to be with y'all today.
And this is Giovanny Panginda, or you can call me Gio, and I am here with you today as well.
Yes, it is such a gift to be able to do this together, and I am excited to start a new season. So welcome to the Fuller Youth Institute FYI on Youth Ministry podcast. And I want to formally welcome you to a new season. We're excited to be your hosts and dive into really important conversations. And Gio, I'm just so happy to be co-hosting with you this season.
Me too. I only wish people could see us, because we know that at some point when we're hosting, we're gonna be singing and dancing and singing and dancing.
Give it to them. Tell the people what they're gonna miss. Yes. But it'll not be any less fun listening to us because the conversation we're gonna have is gonna be so rich. For those of you who may not know, I serve on the team as the Multicultural Special Project Manager. And for this particular season, I was part of the research team that made this resource happen. And Gio, what is your connection to the conversation that we're going to have?
Yeah, I'm here as a project coordinator at Fuller Youth Institute, but I am also a youth and college pastor of a Chinese Indonesian church. Beautiful. So I bring some practicality here, I guess.
Yes. Make it real. We love that. Well, today we are so glad that we have 2 guests with us, very important guests, both for the team at FYI, but also for this season. Kara is the Chief of Leadership Formation and is the Executive Director of the Fuller Youth Institute, which is where we all work. And most importantly, Kara is also a leader and a mother who lives all of the things she talks about in real time and real life. And so I'm excited to have her expertise come to you today as something that we get to enjoy as team members all the time.
Yeah, and Brad is a senior director of content here at the Fuller Youth Institute. And I'd like to think of Brad as the soul or the sage of FYI. He's like Pixar in flesh and blood, because he's filled with stories and wholesome lessons to learn. Ever since I was an intern, I've come to know and be at peace when Brad prays.
I love that. Kara keeps us rolling. Brad keeps us praying. That is a good team.
Yeah, I keep us sprinting, I think, is how it often unfolds. But no, Brad and I have worked together for, 15, 16 years now, Brad. And I always say you're far more pastoral and far more Jesus-y than me. So I share Gio's opinion that it's a pleasure and honor to work with you, Brad, and also you two, Jen and Gio.
Wow. For sure. Yeah. Yeah, let's just say people cry in our offices for different reasons. That's one way to look at it.
Tears flow, motivation to be determined. Yeah, and like you said, Kara, you have been working with Brad for over 16 years. And one of the beautiful things that you guys have done in these 16 years, what have they done, Gio, in these 16 years that we're so excited about?
Well, they've written a lot of books, and I mean a lot of books. And I love books, you know. If you could see me right now, I am surrounded by some of their books. So
Yeah, so we're grateful that they are scholars and teachers and authors who distill all the good stuff that we do at FYI through books. And so we are talking about a particular book that you wrote called Three Big Questions. And to kind of set up our conversation, I was thinking about, growing up, our church would have big old potlucks. I think we can all relate to big moments.
Yes.
And hopefully in post-pandemic times, we'll be able to return to tables like this once again.
I can't wait. Yeah.
I'm so excited because particularly I grew up in the Latina immigrant church, and Latin American potlucks are unique because every family takes pride in bringing the dish that they're known for. And so we knew who would bring the beans, who would bring the rice. Like, people were known for what they would bring. And when you would ask individuals for their special recipe, there was always a spot in the list of ingredients or in the process that they would take, and they would pause and say, "Ay, mija, el resto es secreto familiar. The rest is a family secret. I can't tell you." And so at FYI, we cook up a lot of things for the local church, and we strive to serve up our very best for the local church and its leadership. And so today is your very lucky day because we're about to expose our own version of the family secret, and we're not going to stop at any sort of point. So Brad and Kara, this season we want to share more about what this family recipe is all about with our listeners. So Kara, as our executive director, you want to unveil the family secret for us?
Well, first of all, I'm kind of getting hungry, Jen, as you're talking about beans and rice. So thanks for that. Tacos are sounding really good right at this moment. Really, but what I would say is the heart of the Fuller Youth Institute, in addition to our love for Jesus, the church, and young people, really what we're about is we turn research into resources. We take the best research that Fuller and others are doing and turn it into practical resources. And then there's a third R that I would add, and that's relationship. So we love building relationship with youth leaders. We love learning from our relationships with youth leaders, and we love sharing our research-based resources through relationships. So we and I spend a lot of time developing pretty amazing partnerships with church and parachurch organizations, denominations, etc. And in particular with this new book that we're celebrating and talking about today, Three Big Questions That Change Every Teenager, it's the next step in our ongoing research arc. Really, FYI's first major research project was Sticky Faith, where in the midst of 40 to 50% of youth group graduates drifting from the faith after they graduate from high school, we looked at 500 youth group graduates during their first 3 years of college. I used to say through their junior year of college, but first 3 years and junior year, not always the same thing, as we know with today's college students. So we followed 500 youth group graduates through their first 3 years of college to try to understand what families and churches could do to build sticky faith. So that was really a focus on young people themselves. Then, as we, and I in particular, was praying about, what do we study next? We've studied amazing young people. What's the next step? I really felt like the Lord led us to study not just amazing young people, but amazing churches. So that was our next major wave of research in growing young, when we looked at 250 churches that aren't aging or shrinking, but are doing amazing work with teenagers and young adults. And then we followed that with Growing With, which was a look at parents who are amazing parents with 13 to 29-year-olds. One of the big themes in our Growing Young research was empathy, and how important it is for us as adults, those of us over 30, to not judge young people, but to journey with them. And we were already seeing the glimpses in Growing Young of these three big terms: identity, belonging, and purpose. And as we reflected on that more after growing young, as we reflected on all the amazing research on young people, both academic and popular, and young people's faith formation, we came to be convinced that really those three terms, really those three questions, identity, who am I, belonging, where do I fit, and purpose, what difference can I make? Those are the three big questions that drive all of us, but especially drive young people. And so that's how our research has evolved, and God's led us from question to question to question.
Thank you, Kara. And Brad, could you bring us in a little bit more, particularly on the research that led to the latest Three Big Questions book?
Yeah, we knew that if we really wanted to understand this generation and really help adults better understand this generation, we were going to need to just sit down and listen to them. And so we built the project around interviews, and Jen was really instrumental at the early stages of this. We worked so hard on recruiting and scheduling and getting time just with teenagers. And it was amazing. We spent, our interview team spent over 100 hours sitting with 27 students. They were all high school students from across the U.S. We had 3 interviews with each one, up to 2 hours in each session, so that we had the chance to listen and then to go back and listen some more and then to go back and listen again and to ask a lot of questions. We asked over 170 questions across those 3 interviews.
Wow.
It was so fun. And we made sure that, this Gen Z, those under 18 in particular, are the most racially and ethnically diverse generation of all time. We really wanted to represent that in the research itself. And so we made sure that we overrepresented for ethnic and racial diversity in particular in that sample. We also followed this up. We had a team of folks who were studying all the latest research on today's young people. So much of the way I've noticed this in youth ministry in particular, that we talk about teenagers, we're talking about millennials, and just, newsflash, millennials are hitting 40,
That's
like we're not.
right.
No.
Rude. It's true.
When we're talking about millennials, or when we're talking about like the National Study of Youth and Religion, a lot of people, still tap into that data. It was a wonderful data set, but those young people are in their 30s, many of them. And so we really wanted to know, okay, well, what's the latest research on teenagers right now? It really enriched what we were hearing. It informed what we were asking. We also had a survey component through another project where we surveyed over 2,000 young people specifically about these questions of identity, belonging, purpose, and just had a rich data set to work with there as well. So lots of data, lots of stories.
Kara, speaking of questions, so I am very fortunate that my students actually are not shy to ask questions, and they ask fun questions like, what's up with the dinosaurs in the Bible? Like, where are they? And do animals go to heaven or just dogs? To other questions like, can you still be a Christian and not go to church?
Yeah.
Or like, if your family is a Christian, does that make you a Christian? So in terms of questions, like this book is called Three Big Questions That Change Every Teenager. So you mentioned a bit about these three big questions of identity, belonging, and purpose, but why are these questions so important to young people?
Well, your teenagers sound like the kind of teenagers that I'd love to spend time with. And honestly, that's part of what I love about young people is they'll ask anything at any time. And so I love young people's questions. So yeah, in some ways, young people are kind of walking bundles of questions that they're trying to figure out the world and their place in it. And so, on the surface, they might be asking a question like, can I still be a Christian and not go to church? That might be a surface question. That's an important question. Mm-hmm. But what Brad and I and our research team came to believe is that under most questions, and close to all, but I'm going to say most, under most questions, what's really pulsing beneath that is a hunger to know who we are, that's our identity, mm-hmm. where we fit, That's our belonging. And our purpose. What difference can I make? And so, the question, can I still be a Christian and not go to church? Well, my hunch is that boiling beneath that is either identity and or belonging, wanting to know, can I identify as a Christian if I'm not still part of this community called the church? So, these questions have become new eyes for me to understand young people. And beneath the behavior is a drive for identity, belonging, and purpose. And so to always be asking, what's in the driver's seat that's really motivating this 14-year-old, this 18-year-old? Now, I will be honest, those of us over 30, I would say every human, we're dealing with identity, belonging, and purpose questions also. Sure. It's just that for those of us over 30, they're more at a low simmer, where those of us under 30, they're more at a rolling boil. And so they're just more intense and more daily and more turbulent for young people. But these are questions that all of us are navigating every day ourselves.
Yeah, I found myself nodding to that, Kara. I asked myself those questions periodically, but they were the question to answer when I was 15 and trying to figure out life.
And Jen, I love you as a researcher. I remember you saying that our questions about identity, belonging, and purpose, which we asked young people, and all of which are in the book, we put all 170 questions in the book. You spent some time just journaling and reflecting on those yourself to understand your own identity, belonging, and purpose journey, which I love. And that's part of what we invite every adult to do in the book. Mentor, pastor, parent, step parent, is to think about their own identity, belonging, purpose journey too. So
yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up as a memory. I just remember one of my roles when I was a youth pastor was I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to ask anything of my students that I wouldn't ask of myself. Yes. And so when we were doing this interview process, I said, well, I think the rule still applies here. And so I'm not going to ask these students to sit with me for 2 hours for questions I haven't considered myself. Yeah. And they were deep and important questions. So I do hope you take advantage of that list of questions. And truth be told, Brad, I mean, when you are a youth pastor, a leader, a small group leader, a parent, oftentimes the messaging we're given when we're in those positions is that we are supposed to have the answers, right? That we are supposed to just have the magic bullet answer that will just help our students, help the person that we love lead back to Jesus. And so I can imagine how somebody's listening to this going, questions? No. We're supposed to be the answer people. And so if you could bring us into why it is so important that as leaders and pastors and those that love young people, how can these questions better help us know how to disciple our young people and youth group, particularly in a year where questions is all we've had?
I'm glad you asked that, because I do think we like to be answer people, don't we? And we think that what it means to be a good mentor, a good youth pastor, a good, leader, a good parent, anyone in those categories, walking with a teenager in particular, that we feel like we should have the answers, or we should give them the answers. And what we really want to affirm is that the questions are so important to the discipleship journey, and being present with a young person in the questions is discipling them. Now, the next step then is to listen with them and ask more questions and lead them towards better answers. Because the thing is that most young people, they do have answers to those questions. They're finding answers. Mm-hmm. They're just not very satisfying answers, or sometimes they're actually toxic answers. They're destructive answers to those questions. And as people of the gospel of Jesus Christ, we know that there are better answers out there. We believe that following in the way of Jesus leads young people towards more healthy and whole and beautiful answers to those important questions. And so rather than being the answer people, we can lead them into a journey of discovering those answers. And, as we wrestled with this on our own, we have, I guess, what you'd say are our suggested answers to the questions that we believe all young people need to know. When you're really wrestling with that question of who am I, what most of us need to know is I am enough. I am enough because of Jesus. I remember one youth ministry leader said to us, I can't say enough to my students, you're enough. You're enough. You know, that constant need to prove yourself or perform or prove that you have worth or value. God says you're enough. When we're asking that question of where do I fit? Where do I really belong? We believe that the deepest answer is with. We belong with God and with each other. That in the body of Christ, when it's being the body of Christ, when we're really loving the way that God called us to love, we're a community where everyone belongs with everyone else. And when we're wrestling with that question of purpose and what difference can I make, that we can lead young people towards understanding that their story finds its greatest meaning and purpose in the midst of God's greater story and what God is doing and has done and will do. And so those words enough, with, and story, they're kind of markers for us of where we want to lead young people in those discipleship conversations. But it doesn't mean we're just flat out giving them answers to their questions. It means we're walking with them, we're helping them explore, we're helping them discover those answers on their own journey.
Hey y'all, I have some really exciting news to share with you. So we actually teamed up with our friends at Orange to create a very special 4-week curriculum that is based on our latest book, 3 Big Questions That Change Every Teenager. So if you want to spark discipleship conversations, this curriculum series is perfect. It's packed with teaching guides, multimedia resources, and social media tools. You can find the curriculum and the book at fulleryouthinstitute.org/store. And don't forget to use the code FYI Podcast to get $5 off on a purchase of $20 or more.
I see these kinds of questions with my students. I will admit I didn't do a good job earlier with my students in helping them navigate the identity, belonging, purpose, mainly because, at times they thought that some of the things that I was saying or what their parents were saying were like nagging, or that like Christianity was like filled with just rules and rules and rules and sin management and things like that. And I really had to kind of take a step back and just kind of listen to the questions that they were asking and what it was that was aching their hearts. And you're right. When you take a look at the questions that ache their hearts, it has to do with identity, belonging, and purpose. And it has to do with whether or not they are enough, not just in the eyes of their parents or in the eyes of the school or in the eyes of the church, but especially in the eyes of God. So I love that. And I was wondering, like, how can these questions then help a ministry leader or even a parent have a better relationship with their teenagers?
Yeah, well, I can share how they have helped me have a better relationship with my teenagers. And they just fill me with so much understanding and empathy. And if ever one of my kids, and our kids are now 20, 18, and 15, and if ever one of our kids is doing something that just doesn't quite make sense or doesn't seem like them or just seems a little askew, when I step back and say, okay, wait, how is this their quest for identity, belonging, and purpose? It all makes sense. Like the penny drops. Yeah. And that's what they're after. And I mean, even this weekend, this past weekend, Krista, our 18-year-old, and I, we got into conflict. And I think it was largely because of our different insecurities when it comes to identity, belonging, and purpose. And so she has been spending a ton of time with her friends who we love, and we're thrilled that she's spending time with them. But my area of insecurity is in identity and not feeling like I'm enough. And particularly as a mom, not feeling like I'm a good enough mom. That is my biggest area of insecurity and vulnerability. And so when Krista's out of our house all the time, I feel like, oh, she doesn't want to be with me. And so it triggers my identity insecurity. Well, when I talked to Krista about, gosh, I wish that, we could have you home more, she's driven by belonging and especially her peers. And so, when I ask for that, that threatens what she's hungering for, which is that sense of belonging that these days for her is coming a lot from peers. And so this past weekend, I was saying, gosh, Krista, it feels like you don't want to be around home much. And she said, no, that's not true. I really like being around home. I just like being around my friends too. And like, we're both in tears about this because my identity insecurity was bumping up against her quest for belonging. And so, that's one of the things that Brad and I have thought about ourselves and encourage any adult to do is think about, in the midst of identity, belonging, and purpose, what is driving you at this moment and maybe what drives you in general. So, I've already said my fear of not being enough drives a lot of me. My husband, he's a real purpose guy. Like, he feels closest to God, hammer in hand and serving tangibly. And so, that's what often leads the way for him with his growth, with his formation. And Brad, you would say belonging, right? You've said that before in conversation, that's really what informs you as well as an important door for your ongoing experiences, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think this is an interesting question for all of us to reflect on ourselves and think about with the young people closest to us, what's driving them at this moment and what drives them in general, and how can that help us better relate, understand, empathize. In the case of me this weekend with Krista, I ended up apologizing to her because I was misunderstanding what she was doing, and she did the same to me. So it ended up being a rich time of connection, but there was a lot of turbulence before we got to that landing. Let me just say that. So
yeah. And, Carrie already alluded to this, but every research project that we have done and any church that we have worked for and with, it's just so evident to us that we cannot do any of this work without empathy. And we talk a lot about empathy, but we know that empathy is a skill that requires practice and repetition. You don't wake up one day having a magical amount of, it's not like pixie dust. And you're like, oh, wow, I can have so much, I have so much capaciousness for empathy. I could just understand everybody. And when I see both of you, particularly in the story that you just shared, I could think many of us listen to the story and go, wow, that's so beautiful that you got to that place. And some of us might hear it and go, oh, that would never happen in my family structure. I wish I could have that with this person I really care about. So it just shows how much you have particularly been working at your empathy chops for a bit. It's not something that you arrived at with Krista overnight. You both have had a lot of practice and have chosen to practice and to repeat what it means to be empathetic people and to practice that out. And so, Brad, I would love to hear your take on it. What are 2 things a youth worker, guardian, teacher, or pastor can do to empathize with young people in their lives when it comes to identity, belonging, and purpose?
Yeah, I want to reiterate and affirm that, it takes work for most of us. We certainly go on these journeys. And that would be the first, my first word to all of us is keep going on your own journey and tap back into your own journey. So, not only your journey of becoming more empathetic, though we certainly can work on that and work on what it looks like to practice the skills of empathy, the skills of noticing someone and really choosing to care for what they're experiencing.
And don't you think, Brad, that remembering our own experience as teenagers helps us with that? And, I love how you bring that out in the book when you talk about a particular shirt. Do you want to talk about how much you wanted a shirt? I think this is fascinating. And I think if you tell this story about the shirt, my hunch is most of us can fill in the blank with what it was for us in high school. So go ahead, Brad. Why don't you tell the shirt story?
Yeah, very good. I was going to say, I can't believe you're going to make me tell this one. And then I thought, oh, well, I did actually write about it. So it's on my head already. So I remember in a particular phase of my own, adolescence when fashion was particularly important to me. And Guerra, you mentioned that belonging is something that has led the way for me. And that was particularly true in those teen years. And I felt like I didn't fit in. I felt like I really struggled to belong at my school in particular and at social circles. I just kind of felt like an outsider. And one of the things that I looked to help me find my way was fashion, and yet I didn't have much of a fashion budget, so I had a little problem there, right? But in the late 80s, early 90s, in the South where I was, there were these Coke shirts, Coca-Cola, like the Coca-Cola company, and there were these polos, and I remember this one particular Coke shirt that I wanted for ages, I don't know how long, but I finally got a blue rugby with a white stripe across the front that had Coca-Cola written in red and a little white collar. And when I wore that shirt to school, I felt like, okay, this is it. Like I belong now. This is my marker of belonging. And it took me a while, I'm sure it took me till years later when I really understood that was just a shadow feeling of belonging. I knew that it was fleeting. I knew that it was not real. It was a marker of fitting in more than actually belonging. And retracing those journeys for ourselves can be so important because we remember what it's like, so I have teenagers and maybe it's fashion, maybe it's something totally different. For a lot of teenagers, it's what kind of cell phone do you have, or which apps or which platforms, which social media spaces, are you on, and what are you sharing there? And those are those same markers. Maybe it's about belonging, maybe it's about identity, maybe it's about purpose, maybe it's about all three tied together. So if we can retrace some of our own journey, we can empathize. And that's one of the first big steps in building our empathy for young people. And then we can follow that by just being curious. When we see something that we don't quite understand, to ask, tell me more about that. Help me understand. Tell me what you're going for there, or what you mean when you post this, or you say that, or you, in my case, when you want to wear that shirt.
Yeah, for me, it was neon colored t-shirts. That was the thing for me. Cause I'm older than y'all. And so it was neon colored t-shirts. And if I had those, then I felt like I fit in, cause that was the style in that era. So.
Yeah, for me as a 90s baby, it was the ponchos. It was like you had the platform sneakers and the skinny jeans, and then just like an oversized poncho over really random things. And Brad, I'm curious, this idea of not assume but be curious and then tell me more. I wonder if you could tell me a time in which you used that phrase. And how did it go? Like, if you could walk us through a real-time scenario where you use this phrase, tell me more, so that we can get a picture of what this looks like in real time.
Probably my best examples come from parenting because I make so many, mistakes. But I think about, I'll go back to social media because I just kind of touched on that. My kids post things that I don't understand, and I think I can make a lot of assumptions about a picture or a phrase. And, I have found that actually asking that question, tell me more about that, or help me understand that. I feel like those phrases kind of go hand in hand, where I can see that maybe a picture looks to me like, maybe it's begging for attention, or maybe it's beyond my own comfort level, right? And I find that there's something else there about the ways teenagers are communicating with each other, or trying to share something, or even just sharing a joke that I don't understand it as a joke because I don't understand teen humor, because I'm continually, out of the loop. So I use the phrase a lot. I use it with my kids. Slang is actually another really great example. Teenagers are experts in teen slang. And so I find that they actually sometimes they want, and this is more maybe in our youth ministry setting because I'm also a youth leader, but where teenagers want to tell you what something means. I mean, most of the time, right? There's certain slang that they're like, oh, you don't want to know what that means. but where, help me understand the difference between this phrase and this phrase. And that was our dinner table conversation the other night, was around this, a couple of different phrases that, I thought it meant this and actually it meant something else. And tell me more is like, it's like a way in to some of those conversations.
Yeah.
Kara, this season we're going to end each episode with everyone sharing one final word of encouragement. But before I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask my co-host Jen. Jen, do you have a word of encouragement for us?
If you've heard other seasons or if you just know me, you know that I quote my grandma or my dad or my mom. I'm quoting somebody because I'm just grateful for the adults in my life. And so I was thinking about the words. I don't know if this is a grandma, abuelita says the original, but something that she would always tell me. She said, Mija, God is the best creator we have. And God's designs are so perfect and so important. And every time I would get a little too verbose, she would say, Mija, the way that God created you was to have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and just 1 mouth. And so she said, let's follow God's design for human connection, which is to pay attention through our senses, to listen much more and to observe much more than what we want to comment on. And so let's use both of our eyes and both of our ears far more than we use our 1 mouth.
Beautiful. Love it. For me, I am going to take a little bit of what Brad said about his shirt. Like, I'm going to look for the shirts, the neon T-shirts. And Jen, what was yours?
Poncho with platform,
the ponchos,
sneakers.
Yeah. And for me, it was my Air Force Ones. I'm going to look for those in the kids. What is it that makes them feel like they need this to belong? And what is it really that they want to feel when it comes to belongingness. But in addition to that, I also think that as youth leaders, I think we should just be honest with what we can answer and what we cannot answer. Not to fake it, because I believe that the young people in our lives, they know when you're speaking truth and when you're, what they would say, when you're cap. Which is like lying. Like that's a term.
That's slang, Brad.
Yeah, that's a slang, Brad. Like cap and no
Thanks,
cap.
Gio.
So no cap, Yeah. So just be honest when you can't answer. And just listen to what they have to say. Yeah. How about you, Kara?
Oh, well, I think just in the spirit of encouraging us as adults, I remember one of the phrases that have stood out to me the most in interviews that we've done with parents and leaders was when someone said, as long as you have relationship, you have influence. As long as you have relationship, you have influence. And so thinking and focusing on young people's identity, belonging, and purpose questions is a great way to build relationship. And as long as you have relationship, you have influence. So just want to encourage adults who are feeling a little bit weary, who are seeing kids maybe make decisions that they wish they weren't making. As long as you have relationship, you have influence.
Beautiful. And how about you, Brad?
Yeah, mine really is to youth workers as well, directly, of you. You are the adult your students need. Our own insecurities, I'm so glad, Kara, you brought up insecurities earlier. Our own insecurities sometimes drive us to think we're not enough, that we don't have much of a story, that, maybe we can't lead these students or we're not enough of a disciple or a leader or whatever. But you are the person your students need right now. And God has put you there for this time with these people. And so lean into that.
Yeah. So whoever it is that is listening, just know that our team believes in you, prays for you, and constantly wants to resource you with our very best, including our family recipes. So we are excited for the season to come, and we just want to thank you for spending your time with us today.
Thank you, everyone. And we'd like to thank our guests, Kara and Brad, for joining us in our conversation today about the 3 big questions that every teenager asks.
great to be with you.
Love the conversation. Thanks, y'all.
I was going to say, and also with you.
Clearly, we've been conditioned.
Was this a great podcast or what? Thanks to Jen, Gio, Kara, and Brad for that insightful and encouraging conversation. And also special thanks to our teens, Isaac, Tanya, Ava, and Wyatt. Did you know that this episode is just one of the many free resources produced by the Fuller Youth Institute? To learn more about any of the topics we discussed today or other youth ministry topics, check out our books and training at fulleryouthinstitute.org.
Because of this pandemic, I was a child going in, and then a teenager coming out. We've been stuck inside. We've kind of stalled our maturity because of it. Because I think that'll be very interesting. Yeah, because all of the new 6th graders in our school will probably still act like 4th graders, right? So act younger, which I think is interesting. I've been thinking about that a lot, but hey, it hasn't happened yet. We'll just see.